Greetings! Today on my Focus RS, I am upgrading the front brakes. Alrighty, here we are then, all the bits for both upgrading and refreshing our front brakes on the RS, and everything here is either from Ford or from EBC. So, I mean, we'll start with probably the obvious parts, the biggest bit. So this is the EBC two-piece floating system, and as you can see, they are absolutely awesome looking. You've got the big aluminium bells in the middle, bolted onto the steel rotor with this cool unique groove pattern. Of course, that's a two-piece. The floating part is with regards to these little bobbin things, which allows the rotor to sort of slightly move, which means that we essentially get more even braking and even pad wear. EBC says that the idea is that it allows the friction ring to grow independently of the hub, dramatically increasing stopping performance and service life, which is obviously pretty sweet. These are a decent chunk lighter as well, which is another benefit than the stock rotors, the stock fully steel rotors. This groove pattern actually does have a name. EBC call this the swept groove, and it's pretty cool looking, I think. And of course, if you remember from the rear brake upgrade that I recently did, Raylan Motorsport copied this for me on their discs, which was absolutely awesome. So once we get these on, the fronts and rears will match beautifully and perfectly, which is great. Another big thing about these EBC discs is actually the vanes, so like up in the middle. OEM discs, because they're just like the same on every disc that they make, half of them run in the wrong direction, whereas these have curved vanes specific to each side, which means that they are going in the correct direction both sides, and that of course will improve cooling efficiency. So that is another pretty sweet feature. The pads then, also from EBC, are the matching yellow stuff that we put on the rear. So very simply, we're gonna get increased performance and some improved looks as well, because they're of course painted yellow, which is awesome. So yeah, these are kind of like halfway in between fast road and track use. These are the changed formula of yellow stuff. I bought these a while ago. So like whenever EBC changed the yellow stuff formulation, the yellow stuff became maybe less of a trackpad, but as I say, these are the previous spec version. If you're buying them today, you might want to go for the blue stuff. But anyway, yeah, that's the pads. Very simple, gonna match the rears, gonna look awesome. You'll see a little bit of yellow poking through. Moving on then to the other parts. These are all genuine Ford parts, or technically they're Brembo parts supplied from Ford genuine parts. So what we have this center pin bolt thing, which they describe as a connecting pipe. This is the part that goes through the middle and sort of connects directly to this, which is our brake shoe hold down spring, and this is kind of what all the pins sort of like lean on, if you like. And as you can see, we have two brand new pins as well. So this is what goes into the center groove here, sort of like provides a bit of downward pressure, and these two little ones very similar, but are top and bottom. For some reason they deem it fit to give you like this instruction manual from Brembo with every single part. So if you're like me and you're replacing all of these on both sides, you're going to end up with 4 of these like Brembo manuals that you're probably not even going to look at. But anyway, yeah, very simple, a lot simpler of an upgrade and a refresh than the rears, so probably won't take as much time, but it's going to be just as effective and look great and be all nice and fresh. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, first thing then, I'm going to bang out these 2 pins right here. You can see around the back that they are the ones that go through the pads and come out the other end. So to do this, I'm going to use a couple of punches. So I'm going to start off with this big one. Now this is bigger than the diameter of the pin, and it's bigger than the hole that the pin comes through. So I'm really only using this big one to get it started, and then I'm going to switch over to a smaller one. The reason why I'm not going with the smaller one to start with is because these are in pretty tight, and especially with all this sort of like crud that's built up over the past number of years. It's going to need a decent bit of hammering to get these loose, and with the smaller punch, being that the pin comes to a point, the smaller the punch, the easier it is to like slide off the side and potentially damage the paintwork on the caliper, which we don't want to do. What we can do though to add a bit of protection is we can put a few layers of tape around the pin, just so that if we do happen to slip off, instead of scoring the paintwork, we just hit the tape. So I might do that now, and then we'll start hammering. So there we go, got some tape on there. Another tip is to wear a glove and hold the punch really close to the end with like your thumb or your finger up against the caliper, because that way if you do slip off, you're going to just like hit your thumb or part of your glove rather than dinging your caliper. And if it does like sort of nip, well, you're wearing gloves, so it shouldn't hurt too bad at least. So yeah, let's get this out. So that was fairly easy just to get it going. Hopefully you can see there that the pin has indeed started to get in quite close to the tape, which is an indication that we are moving and that it's time to switch over to the smaller punch. So here we are with the smaller one. Just for reference, this is a 5mm or a 3/16 punch. Okay, so now we can reach in, give it a wiggle and a jiggle, and eventually reasonable bit of crud in the middle of the pin, which is why it's a bit tough to get out. But eventually it comes out. You can just kind of see the crud build up, which is just exactly what was causing it to be a bit of a tight squeeze. Obviously, if you're doing this often, you know, if you're changing your pads fairly often, then you won't have so much of that. But, you know, it wasn't too much of a big deal and it did come out. It just required a little bit of extra wiggling. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing for the other one. There we go, that's the other one out. And we haven't damaged our paintwork, which is ideal, of course. So now we can move our attention to this center bolt pin jobby that is holding the spring down in place. So the first thing we need to do is around the back here, there's a bolt and it is a 13mm, so we need to remove that. So this bolt isn't in super tight, so just a regular 3/8 ratchet should do the job. There we are. Okay, so this bit can be potentially not a lot of fun because with the sort of crud buildup and a bit of corrosion on the surface, this can be a little bit tough to get out the hole on the other side. So, I mean, I've got a wire brush here, so I'm going to give this a decent bit of a rub down just to sort of smooth off the surface and give it the best chance of coming out. Otherwise it could get a little bit stuck. But yeah, get it cleaned up initially and then we'll start sort of hammering it out from the other side. So initially, to get this started, I'm actually going to screw the little bolt in a bit, not all the way because we want to leave a bit of space for it to move. So once it's like not like super loose, then I'm going to use that as a surface to like basically hammer. And also for this process, I'm using an 8mm deep socket, kind of like as a punch. So essentially just resting that on there and then hitting the end of the socket, just so that I'm not swinging the hammer like really close to the caliper, because again, we don't really want to risk slipping or missing and smashing up our paintwork. Hopefully you can see we've got a little bit of gap here now, and you can see just a little bit where there wasn't as much crud here where it's moved. So now if I remove the bolt again, it might be hard for you to see, but around the back here we now have like a recess, basically where the hole is that this pin goes through, which means I can now fit the end of this 8mm socket into that hole, and I know that it is located correctly. 8mm just happens to be the exact right size for fitting into the hole and lining up nicely with the face of this to give it a good smack. So essentially that's what we just need to keep on doing, is just keep on hammering this until until it comes out. Might at some point have to try and remove some more of the crud on here. The more I look at it, the more cruddy it looks, but hopefully it will just come out nicely. So now if we push the spring, that crud, push the spring basically and wiggle it. Yeah, with that crud on there, it really doesn't want to come through. So if you're in this situation where the crud on the end here on this side is stopping it from going through the hole, as you can see it's pretty much just stopped here, I can use a bit of sandpaper and sort of sneak it in there and wrap it around and sort of just do this to like release some of the crud, and then hopefully it'll come out. Just one other thing actually while I'm in this position, we're pretty close to the pin no longer holding this spring on, so I actually might be able to sort of angle and shimmy this out, which will, yeah, there we go. I'll give us a little bit more wiggle room with the pin, but yeah, that's the spring out. Another thing that might help would be a little spritz of WD-40. What I'm doing here is I'm actually going to try and give it a bit of a tap with my larger punch, but hitting it the wrong way around to give us a bigger like surface area here. Goes through the hole nicely and it matches up with the end of the pin nicely as well. Oh, there we go. Ew. Okay, now it's time to get the pads out, and in theory they should be like loose at this point, but as you can see they are kind of in there. Now they're not like stuck to the rotor. You can see that I can move it quite easily, so they are basically like welded to the pistons, so we're gonna have to do a little bit of prying, maybe a little bit of tapping, just to get them loosened off of the pistons, and then in theory they should then just slide out the back here. There we are. And yeah, you can kind of see like just how sort of caked on the pad was to the pistons. That's actually like this shim is actually like rubber, which is probably why it was so stuck as opposed to like a metal shim. You can kind of see like the lip there, but yeah, stock pads, very, very stuck on. But yeah, I got that one off. So now with this one off, I mean, it's basically impossible to do the same thing, you know, tapping it out like I was able to do with this front one for the rear. But what we can do now, we can actually unbolt the caliper and get it hung up, and we can then quite easily remove the pad once it is away from the rotor assembly. Before I unbolt the caliper though, what I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to remove this little bolt right here, which is what is in the retaining clip for the brake line, because whenever we remove this, I'm going to be hanging it up here, and with this sort of like locked in place, it means that the brake line could bend like a really nasty angle, but so I'm going to take this out so that it can move a bit more freely, and it actually uses that 8mm that we were using before to bang out the pin from in the middle of the caliper. So just remove this. It's not in like super tight or anything. Okay, so whenever that comes off, then you can see that that is just now nice and free and can move around. In around the back here, hopefully you can see these two big bolts right here that are holding the caliper on. So in terms of socket size, what we need for that is an 18mm, and they are unreasonably tight. So I mean, it's kind of an awkward kind of thing for leverage here whenever you're reasonably close to the ground as I am, but essentially just, you know, giving it a good pull. For the top one, you can probably get like an impact wrench in there, but the bottom one is kind of obscured by this like deflector thing, so I mean you could take it off and then just use the gun, whatever you want to do, but yeah, basically just have to remove them, and once you remove them, the caliper will be completely free, and then we are going to hang it up. Before I remove these bolts though, I'm going to give them a good rub with the wire brush and probably give them a hit with some WD-40 as I have before, just because they have a bit of surface rust and a bit of crud on there. And yeah, whenever we're hanging the caliper up, I'm going to be using one of these. This is well, it's a hook, obviously. It's just a hook in the shape of an S, which is designed for just this type of thing. The handy thing about the stock dampers is that there's actually a couple of extra holes in there that you can hang one of these hooks on. Some people, you know, might tell you to hang it on your spring like that, which is fine as well, I suppose, but I figure might as well use this bare bit of metal with a hole in it, because it just works. So yeah, let's get this off and hang it up. So you can see there now we are hanging the caliper off of that hole in the bottom of the dumper. Okay, so yeah, now we can, as you can hopefully see, much more easily get in here and access this other pad. Just to give it a wee bit of a pry here. And yeah, it's just like, it's oddly sort of stuck in there. There, it's just falling out now. There we go. Okay, the last thing that we need to remove then is the old rotor here. Now, I mean, in theory, it's now no longer like connected to anything, but as you can see, it's pretty well rusted onto the hub. So, as has become quite a common thing with these installs with the brakes, I'm going to utilize the wire brush, trying to just get rid of any crud I can around like the center of the hub here, and then I'll maybe give it a little spritz with WD-40, and then we will have to grab a hammer and just sort of tap it until it comes loose. Alright, so with the rotor off then, we're pretty much ready to start building this back up, but it's probably quite obvious that it's very nasty and dirty and cruddy and everything in here, so I'm just going to take some time off camera just to get this all cleaned up, and then I will come back to you and continue with the new brakes installation. So now actually might be a good time to do a little bit of a side-by-side comparison, since we've just removed the stock bits and we're getting ready to put our nice new bits on. So the biggest and most obvious one is of course the discs. So the old stock discs are of course just flat steel, no grooves like we have in the EBC. I mean, they're not in the terrible condition, they are a little bit lipped, you probably can't see that on camera, but you know, they're not like totally like done or anything. It was just time, I think, for an upgrade, and of course they are this like one-piece steel construction, quite heavy, versus the much lighter EBC two-piece floating. So yeah, just an upgrade in pretty much every way on the discs, and they look a lot better. Okay, the other smaller bits of hardware then, the next most significant bit being the pads. So you can see, I mean, again, There is a bit of meat left on there, not a huge amount, but you know, they weren't necessarily, you know, done, ready for the bin. They certainly weren't as bad as the rears were, but if I grab one of the nice new ones from EBC, the nice yellow stuff, you can see there's about twice as much meat on a brand new pad. And of course, these are a more performant compound, and they are painted bright yellow, so they're gonna look pretty cool. Try and do like top down, sort of side by side. You know, you can see the difference in the amount of meat left. So, yeah, gonna be a nice upgrade on the pads. The old hold down spring versus a nice new one. I mean, you know, there's not really anything wrong with the old one. It's probably just a bit cruddy and dirty. So realistically, you know, could reuse this and clean it up. But, you know, I figured the new ones are reasonably inexpensive, so why not? And then we have these pins right here. Again, you know, something similar. You know, you might be able to like clean up all of this crud. You know, there is a little bit of surface rust on like this bit right here, which is the part that sort of compresses in the back of the caliper and holds this securely. But so yeah, I mean, you know, nice new hardware is always nice. Plus, like the sort of hammering out of these pins, you can maybe see it slightly flattens off the end, which isn't obviously an issue, you know, in how it works or anything. It's more of a visual thing, you know, compared to like a brand new one, which has that, you know, a nicer sort of point to it. You know, so if you were to reuse these, wouldn't be an issue, just might not look quite as nice as a brand new one. Similarly then, the larger one that goes through the middle, you know, you could probably clean this up. There is, I think, a bit more like corrosion on the surface of this, so, you know, cleaning it up and removing that, you know, it would probably be okay for like maybe 1 or 2 like repeat uses, but ultimately it's going to need replaced at some point. And again, it's not that expensive just to get the nice brand new ones. So I mean, side by side, you know, it's a night and day difference. Beautiful. It's going to look really, really nice. Not having any kind of corrosion or rust going on the surface at all, of course, and it's going to work perfectly because they are genuine Brembo parts applied from Ford Parts, so it is all good. So that's all the replacement parts. We can now go and get them installed. Alright then, reasonably well cleaned up. The next thing that we can do is to push the pistons back in. You can see that I have the caliper bolted on here again. It's just like sort of hand tight, you know, just so that it's not like moving around. But of course, once I do this, I will have to remove the caliper again in order to do the disc. But having this bolted on just makes this process a lot easier. So the first thing to do is actually to pop off the reservoir cap up here, just because whenever we push the pistons back in, of course there are 2 on that side and 2 on this side. That's going to create some pressure going backwards in the system, pushing the brake fluid, so we just open up the cap just to relieve the pressure when we do that. If you wanted to, you could open up the bleed nipples and you know, let the fluid actually come out, but either way is good. I think it's easier just to do it this way. So in order to push these in, I've got this really handy tool right here. So the way this works is that we literally just get it in, and then it's got this handle, and it literally just ratchets the 2 sides, which kind of simulate pads. They like just go like this and push all 4 pistons in at the same time, which is absolutely handy, and it's really super easy to use and super effective tool. The first thing to do is to like unwind this to the point where it is just about fitting snugly in here in between the 2 sides. So I'll do that now. Okay, so whenever we've got it to approximately the right size, we just slot it in and make sure that the sort of fake pad things are nicely aligned against all 4 pistons, and then really simply, well, we just have to kind of, whilst they're a little bit loose, we kind of just have to like try and hold them as best as we can, and then we literally just ratchet it a wee bit, and it creates a bit of tension, and we can still adjust. And then we'll get to a point where it is pretty tightly in there, and we literally just keep ratcheting until the pistons are pushed all the way in, and they'll be all the way in whenever we can't ratchet anymore. Okay, Okay, that's getting pretty tight now, so that means that we've pushed them all the way in. So then there's like just a little like lever on here that goes the other way, so that whenever we ratchet, it loosens to remove the tool. So as you can see, pistons are all the way in and they're not like popping back out. The rubber boots look to be in excellent condition, and yeah, that's us ready to go. So as I was saying, we can now take the caliper off, and the next thing is to get the disc on. Alright, before we get the actual disc on, we need to use some brake cleaner just to clean up the surface of the rotor. As per the little instructions here, you can see thoroughly wash blah 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 to remove oil from manufacturer. Also, obviously we need to remove this sticker right here. You can kind of see there's a bit of residue left behind there, but obviously that will get removed by our brake cleaner as well. You can see that there's another sticker we need to remove. This is a big R, which indicates that this is for the right hand side, which in the UK is the driver's side. That's the right hand side as you would be inside the car. So that is this disc, so we'll just remove this little sticker also. There we go. So yeah, what I've got is I've just got an old rag that I can throw out afterwards. I'm going to spray the brake cleaner onto the rag and then just give it a good old buff down. Alright, now we can get the disc, which I have right here, onto the hub, but before I do that, I'm going to put some ceramic grease just onto the surface area where the disc is going to contact with the hub. With that done then, we very simply line up the holes with the studs and slide it on. So that's the disc on, but just while we're doing the rest of the work, I've got some old wheel nuts. I'm just going to put them on just by hand, just to hold the disc in place, because of course it is currently just sort of loose on there, and we want it to be sort of held in the correct location. 2 or 3 is fine. Okay, so now I can grab the caliper, get it around in here. It goes on the disc side of the holes in case you like forget from taking it off. So in terms of the bolts, now some people would say that you should be using new ones, but the reason why Ford or whoever might say that is not because these are torque to yield bolts, but it's because of the big bit of Loctite blue that comes from factory, and Ford and whoever are just worried that if you reuse them you'll forget to use thread locker or whatever, so they want you to buy new ones that come with like pre-installed thread locker. Obviously that's a bit of a waste. These are like really quite hardcore bolts, so we might as well reuse them. Of course, putting a good old blob of your favourite thread locker blue on there in approximately the same place, maybe around the other side where there is none. So I'll get these initially in by hand, then I'll just use the regular 1/2 inch with my 18mm socket and just get them sort of roughly tight first, and then we'll talk about torque. Okay, so that is the caliper. I mean, it feels securely on there. I've just done it, you know, sort of as tightly as I can just sort of get it, like with my hand tool here. But yeah, I mean, in terms of torque, I've seen a couple of different torque specs for these two bolts around the back. One place I read, I believe it said 115 Newton meters followed by another 90-degree turn. If you try and do that, you're gonna you're gonna struggle unless you have some kind of really high-powered, like, you know, pneumatic gun or something. So I'd say if you aim for a minimum of 165 Newton meters, maybe up to around like 215 Newton meters, then you will be golden. So there you go, that's them torqued up, and in case you're wondering, I don't know if you can see that, but that's basically my big torque wrench maxed all the way out. It's above the 210 Newton meter line, so it's about 215. So yeah, basically if you just do the same thing, like max out your torque wrench and then just get it, the bolts will take it no problem, they're pretty hardcore. So yeah, I'm happy with that torque, so now we can move on. So the next main thing is pads, but what we can actually do is we can get our brake line just sort of relocated. So this bit, this sort of chunky bit, goes behind this plate, and then we just align up the bracket, the hole in the bracket, with the hole right here in the upright, and then we put our little bolt in there. And we don't need to worry about torque or anything. We'll just tighten it up like reasonably tight by hand. We'll put a little bit of blue thread locker on there, but yeah, just literally put it in, tighten it up, and that's it. Okay, getting the pads in then. Both are identical both sides, so you don't need to worry which is which. In terms of greasing these up, I'm going to get a good amount of grease on the pre-installed shim here, and then also I'm going to get some on the top and the bottom, obviously not on the actual friction surface itself, and that is because you can see just here and here the equivalent up top, either side. These are the areas where the pads like sort of slide into place, and it is a reasonably tight fit. One thing from whenever you're cleaning the caliper up, just make sure that these surfaces right here are nice and clean and, you know, feel nice and smooth. They're quite a sort of crud build-up area, so yeah, you just want to make sure that they're nice and clean and crud free. Otherwise the pads will be really tight to get in. Even with them nice and smooth, they might need a little bit of a tap, so that's why I have the rubber mallet right here, but that shouldn't be too much of an issue. So yeah, let's get these greased up. Alright, there we are, that's the first pad greased up and ready to go. I put a little bit extra just on the corners there that go sort of like in first, just because of the potential tightness, and then that extra will sort of like, you know, spread itself along the surfaces that need to be lubed, just to get this in. But yeah, of course using the same ceramic grease as usual. So yeah, just gonna get this slotted in. Kind of grab it like this and line it up. Yeah, it's a little tight there. So yeah, in terms of hammering this in, we don't want to be like, you know, bashing it really hard. You know, just, you can see just really light taps and it's going in. And in terms of how far in we want to go, hopefully you can see that the edge of the pad has a curvature, and that curvature exactly matches with the curvature of the disc. So basically once those are lined up, then you're all the way in. And of course the mounting holes for our pins will line up with the holes in the caliper too. Okay, so I think that is looking pretty good. Okay, nice. So now I will repeat the exact same with the other one. Okay, so next up we have our spring and the two small pins. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a bit of ceramic grease on these. You don't necessarily always need to put grease on these, but I like to just get some grease onto them, just mainly for the contact points, just to avoid any risk of like squealing or anything going on. So these bits right here, this central bit here, and also in the sort of hook areas, because these pins sort of like hook around like that, so you know, you can kind of hear that with any kind of like movement or vibration that could, you know, cause some squealing. So a little bit of grease will be all good. So then what I'll do is I will start getting the first pin in through, and then we'll hook this around kind of like, you know, sort of loosely. Then we'll get the other pin in, just get everything sort of nicely together and lined up, and then we'll get these hammered in. So these of course slot in from the rear, and hopefully it'll go right in. Yep. So of course, whenever you're pushing it in, you can make sure that the pointy end is lining up with the outer hole. You know, literally just get down and look. Yep, and that looks grand. So what you can actually do then, our trusty rubber mallet, just give it a wee bit of a tap. Checking your alignment all the time. We don't need to go all the way in at this point, just enough to secure it. So then we'll grab our spring and hook it around. And then just at this point we can, you know, just let this sort of drop. Okay, and now we can get our other pin in play. Exact same thing, feeding it around in through the back, but this time, because the spring is kind of already in place, we're just sort of making sure that whenever we push it through, it is like hooked on there. So I'm actually just going to go straight on ahead and get the pins all the way banged in. So I've grabbed my trusty like big punch from earlier. This is the 8mm, and just my regular hammer. So yeah, just going to basically very gently tap, 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 tap. Basically tapping them until they're all the way in, and we know that they're all the way in if I grab the camera here. So these bits right here, you can see that sort of spins around. That's what creates the compression, the tension. Once that goes inside the blue bit right here of the caliper, then that's like sort of going to hold that in place. So that's whenever we stop. You'll probably know what it looks like as well. Once the little pointy bit is poking through, you'll know from before whenever you dismantled the brakes just what it looked like, how far in it was, but essentially it won't go in anymore, and this little like compression spring thing will have completely disappeared into this blue bit, and it'll just look all nice and neat. You will sort of, like, if you're watching with each tap, you will see a point where it literally just stops going in, and that is it. You know, just once it gets to that point, you know, you just stop, don't keep hammering. But yeah, that's kind of what it looks like. You can see that the pointy bits are all the way nicely out here. So yeah, now I can adjust the spring. These little arms of the spring are what need to be on the inside here of the pad, and you can see I need to adjust this. I need to move them a little bit to the outside, but yeah, just gonna line this up, get it all nice and symmetrical. Alright, so now the final piece of the puzzle here is to get our central bolt in and secured. Alright, so I'm going to put a bit of grease on the shaft here. The outside bits, just essentially sort of to lubricate it while we're getting it in, and then the central bit, because that is what's going to sort of like be pressing up against this part of the spring. So a nice bit of grease on here will help that again in terms of noise. As you can see, this brand new one comes pre-applied with thread locker. If you are reusing, you will need to just put some thread locker on there, but yeah, being a brand new one, I can just go straight in with this one. Unlike the other pins that come through from the rear, this one's going to go in through the front. You can see that there's some flat bits. Those flat bits are going to line up top and bottom of this, so essentially like that. So yeah, we'll slide all the way through. Whenever we're pushing it in, we are going to need to like manually compress the spring down, otherwise this would be in the way. So we push that down, slot this in, make sure it's all the way through, and then we can get our little bolt. So get it in hand tight initially, and then we'll torque it up after. So in terms of like compressing this, you can do it with your hand, or if you're having trouble, like, you know, doing it with one hand whilst pushing this through, you can use, you know, like a pair of pliers or something, just to get like both sides of the spring pushed down. But I'll try and do it just with my hand here. Okay then, in terms of torque for this bolt, so 33 Newton meters with our 13mm socket. So the last thing that I'm going to do then is I'm just going to go around and like wipe up any excess grease that we have here just from the installation process. Once I do that, all that's left to do is to get the wheels back on and wheel the installation complete. Well, there we go then. That is the installation finished of the front brake upgrade on the Focus RS, utilising the awesome products from EBC, the yellowstuff pads, and of course the really sweet two-piece floating brake discs. Just the absolute ultimate setup for the stock Brembo brake system, I think anyway. It looks great. The grooves and the discs look really cool. That aluminium bell that you can see in there with the bobbins and the EBC logos and everything looks really sweet. Of course, it's black anodized aluminium, which adds to the awesomeness. And of course, the yellowstuff pads, being that they're painted bright yellow, they look really cool. You can see them quite clearly poking through there. And yeah, it's just an absolutely cool looking setup. Of course, it looks better than stock, and it is also going to perform better than stock. The pad material is uprated, the design of the disc is better, and of course the disc is lighter than stock, so everything just points towards performance increase, which is great. So you may have noticed behind me as well, I have actually popped out the center cap of the Revo wheel. Now the reason that I'm doing this is for a reason that I didn't mention in the previous rear brake upgrade video, and that is for bedding in the brakes. Now when we're bedding in the brakes, essentially the process is to get up to around maybe 60 miles an hour and then brake all the way down, and then back up to 60, brake all the way down, and just repeat that process like 10 times, and that's essentially it. Now the reason why I popped out the center cap is that can generate a fair bit of heat, and the center cap of course is made of plastic, so I'm just following the advice of Revo and that they give where you go on track, which is also quite an intense environment for your brakes, generating a lot of heat. So I've popped that out just so that that doesn't warp whenever I'm bedding in the brakes. So yeah, I'm going to go and do that now, and I'm going to leave this video here. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you like this upgrade as much as I do. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please do like, share and subscribe for more content to come very, very soon. Thank you once again. Goodbye.